it's John and Casey here from Are You Real? And we've been sleeping on my pillow now for over a month. And I'm telling you, our sleep has improved drastically. So what are you waiting for? When are you going to jump on board and start experiencing the kind of restorative sleep you need in your life? Are you waiting for a better offer? Well, your wait is over, because if you go to mypillow.com right now, you can take advantage of the MyPillow 4-pack offer, right, John?
That's right. You get 2 premium MyPillows and 2 to-go anywhere pillows at half off. Just go to mypillow.com, use my code REAL, and get 50% off. Go to mypillow.com, click on the 4-pack special, and enter promo code REAL, or call 1-800-943-4615. But don't forget, you got to use promo code REAL.
Welcome to Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You, the podcast that focuses on Christians that are active in everyday life. Join in as we speak to everyone from successful business owners to educators to athletes about their faith and how it helps them reach out and revolutionize those around them to do the same. And now, get ready to roar with your host, the voice of manifestation, John Fuller.
Hey, Roar Nation, John Fuller here, and we are fired up on this little bit of a chilly morning. Super excited. Today, we are going to be talking about leadership. And I don't care if you own a business or not, because if you run a family, like most of us, or if you're at work or in church ministry or whatever you do, at some capacity, God has called us to lead. And can't think of anybody more qualified than that to get on there to help us out. So that being said, my friend, Tyler Reagin, are you ready to roar, my friend?
I'm ready. This is going to be great.
All right. So Roar Nation, he is the president of Catalyst. It's a leadership development organization that exists to unify and equip leaders who love the church through resources and experiential events, through live events, weekly podcasts, digital resources, and a community building app. They have over 100,000 leaders worldwide, which I think is amazing. He is also the host of Catalyst Podcasts, which receives more than 50,000 downloads a month. So, okay, Tyler, that is just to scratch the surface of kind of what you're doing. But why don't you go a little bit kind of like who you are, what you do, and give us that sky view of it.
Yeah, well, I would say what's missing from that is the highest priority for me is I'm a husband of 17 years, and my wife and I have been married for 17 years. And we've got 2 boys. They're 8 and 11. And, you know, John, at the end of the day, I was telling somebody this the other day, it's like, man, all those titles or opportunities or whatever, those aren't going to end up on any tombstone. I hope that all that ends up there is husband, father, and friend. If I do those things well, then I guess the vocation and the other things we get to do that God calls us to do, they should fall in line pretty well. So that's, you know, I do a lot of this stuff just because I want to model for my boys what it looks like to lead well in our different contexts. Honestly, the reason I ended up writing this book that I just finished was I had a friend tell me basically, if for no other reason, write it for your 2 boys. You know, write everything you believe about leadership for your 2 boys. And that was kind of the thing that took me over the edge. Of like, I could do that, you know. And then Catalyst, the place that you know, employs me, the place that I work. Basically, we go around the country and try to serve Christian leaders, faith-based leaders year round. So we'll do 1-day events. We do 2 big flagship events is what we call them, our Catalyst Atlanta event, which has been around for 19 years. We do it at the Infinite Energy Arena. And then we do a Catalyst West Coast event. This year will be our 11th year out there on the West Coast in the springtime. So, and then we do 1-day events across the country. We do, you know, like you said, podcasts and other things. But our heartbeat is recognizing that how you lead affects people's faith. And like you said at the beginning, it doesn't matter what sphere you're in or what sector you find yourself working in. As a believer, we have a responsibility, a divine directive to lead in a certain way because people's faith depends on it. And so that's a lot of what I do. That's what I think about day in and day out.
Okay, totally dig that. What has been on this journey of yours? What has been like an inspirational scripture or a success quote that kind of just resonates with you right now?
You know, there's 2 things come to mind. Number one is actually what our theme is for this year is based off of John 10:10 that he has come that we have life and have it to the fullest. And there's just something that to me is one of those scriptures that really, when applied, when it's real, when you see that in the lives of believers, it really is something that gives non-believers, people that don't believe in God, it's got to give them cause to kind of pay attention. Like, what's going on over there? That person seems, even in the midst of trial, even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of hard time, they seem to have something different. There's an abundance in the way they live their life. And it's not in money, and it's not in this, that, and the other. It's in just life, you know? So that verse has kind of stayed with me. It's really been my life verse. And then the other thing I think about is a quote, a principle I learned probably well over a decade ago. And it's simply this, that a good product with a bad process is a counterfeit win. And that for me is a leadership quote that makes sense, because every one of us has been in a place where we'll create, like, you know, I know you build houses as a big part of what you do. If you were to build a house and have an incredible house, but none of your contractors, nobody wants to work for you again at the end of the product, that's not a win, right? The process was so bad, nobody wants to be in the room together. That's not a win. That's not sustainable, because now you gotta go find a whole new crew to build the next house, or you got to find a whole new team to put on the next event, or whatever that looks like. And churches really have to pay attention to this too, because a lot of times our Sunday event, our service can get so much attention that how we accomplish the service, how we take care of each other during that, how do we care for each other, that gets put on the side. So a good product with a bad process is a counterfeit win. It feels like a win. It probably even feels like a win from the people who attend that have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. But it's not sustainable if the process is bad.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of wisdom in that. So I definitely like that. I'm laughing about that right now, just thinking about it, because you could look back and think of leaders that you know that are just charged ahead and they get stuff done, and then they turn around and they realize like
nobody with them.
Yeah, nobody, and they're just like, well, you're not leading anybody. So you brought up that verse, and I'm just really curious though. You said, and I love that verse, John 10:10, live life to the fullest. Would you expand on that a little bit? Because what does that mean to you personally? So when you hear that verse, what does that look like in your life?
All right. So John, you're going to bring out the shallow parts of me. All right. So for me,
on, baby.
I know I've never claimed to be a super deep person. But when I grew up around the church here in Atlanta. I never had a problem with Jesus. What I struggled with was I knew a lot of Jesus followers that just weren't very fun. Like, I was like, okay, like, and they're like, hey, you should go to church. I'm like, why?
and what are we going to do exactly?
Very exciting. Yeah. It's like, and as a kid, it's just not fun. Especially my wiring. It's like, it's not fun. I don't want to be there. Like,
right.
And so honestly, I didn't have a problem with Jesus. I just didn't really see a lot of people. And I knew, I was smart enough to know that you go all in on this faith thing, this Christian thing, there are some decisions and there are some life worldview type things that are going to have to change. And so my simple, shallow thinking was, if I've got to change my worldview and not be able to do some of the things all my friends are doing, and on top of that, it doesn't look very fun or life, full of life, I'm not really interested in that. I don't think that's something that, fires me up. Until I got middle high school, and I got invited to a youth group, and I just started seeing difference. I started seeing people who were not only living a different type of life, but they were living it with hope and joy and this abundant type thing. It was an overflow of just joy and excitement and fun. And yet they were having fun while worshiping Jesus, while believing in this faith, while serving other people. And I thought, okay, that makes a lot more sense to me. So it really goes back to the very beginning of my faith journey, where it was just, I was at a concert and I watched this light in people while having fun. And I thought, okay, I'm in. I know that sounds very simple, but I'd wrestle with the Jesus thing. Who is he? All that stuff. I didn't struggle with that. I struggled with the people and whether or not. And so that for me is why this becomes such a life verse, because I just want to do everything in my power to encourage Christians to live this life. It's very real. Now, if I'm being very transparent with you guys right now, like, these last few months for me have been very hard. And trying to hold on to a story like that and a belief like that and a scripture like that in the midst of really hard times is where the rubber hits the road, doesn't it? It's where do I really believe this? Do I really believe that even in these trials, I can have abundant life? And the truth is, there are days I cannot say that I felt that 100% or 10%. But on the whole, when I really give it back over to the Lord and I say, okay, I don't get it, I don't see what you're doing, but it's not my job to see that. My job is to trust and believe and to know that this is a part of the abundant life you're calling me to. There you go. I just have to say it out loud sometimes,
Yeah, for sure. You know what was funny though is when you were talking about that, what it made me think of, because I've been kind of in the same boat. It's all about mountains and valleys. And what I thought about is like in Revelation, it says they defeated an enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And in the testimony is like our faith journey, is like what God has done. Yep. So, I mean, if you look at all through Scripture, all it is a bunch of stories of people like you and I that went through some really hard times, some harder than others, but where God just showed up and did something amazing. And the reason we're able to see that is now that, you've been a Christian for 17, 20, whatever years, you're able to look back and you can see God's faithfulness. So you can, when you're in the middle of a trial, you can say, okay, this is really hard. And if we're honest, it sucks. My faith is tried right now, but I know God's going to come through. I don't know how, and I don't even need to know how, but he's going to show up somehow.
Right. But I'd like to know how. You're welcome to fill me in, Lord, if you want.
Yes.
But but it is. It's very real. And every day, even my wife lately has just been a rock for me. She always has been. But like, even in some of these times where I'm not seeing it or I'm struggling with it, she just looks at me and she'll remind me of those testimonies, remind me of that faithfulness, remind me of those stories. And that's what's sweet about God giving you a partner like that in those times. But one of the things I've really started doing, John, is just proclaiming and reading scripture out loud, just saying it out loud, of going, like exactly what you said, that your word is my shield, and no weapon formed against me shall like saying it out loud versus just kind of like whatever, just going, no, this is truth. When God spoke, he spoke out loud in word. So I'm just trying to kind of keep that central. And it's funny how the stress or the tension on my chest just kind of slowly loosens up. I remember hearing Louis Giglio talk one time about being in one of the darkest seasons of his life, and on the floor, just I really having an anxiety attack. And yet when he chose to worship, it's like the anxiety subsided because he was with the Lord, So it's how does our faith really interact day in and day out? And then how as leaders do we make decisions with our faith integrated into our thinking?
Yeah, I was just going to tie that into leadership because I was thinking about that as a leader. I think the thing that separates us sometimes from people who lead and follow is when it is hard, you do just keep on pushing through, knowing that somewhere God's just going to show up. Like I'm thinking of Moses right now, standing at the edge of the Red Sea. I mean, and I'm thinking if that was you or I standing there, you're just like, okay, God, like now what? Like, we're going to die.
Is there another option?
Told me to come. Like, there is like either you show up or I'm dead. And surely you didn't bring me here to die. And I think that's a lot of times it is just pushing through and saying, okay, God, I know you're going to show up, but we're just going to keep pushing through.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's leadership, isn't it? It's somehow getting in front of your team and mustering up the courage to believe that and say it out loud and help, I think one of the biggest things leaders struggle with, because there's that old, phrase that leadership is lonely. It's lonely at the top. There is a truth to that. And then the fact that there are certain seasons that nobody else understands the weight you carry as a leader. But it's only really true in life if you don't invite people into that circle with you. You could definitely create a leadership situation where it is very lonely because you've not let anybody around you. And my thing has always been, I remember Craig Rochelle, pastor in Oklahoma City. He's always said the same thing. He's like, if I get to the end and build an amazing church, but have no friends, it's all for nothing. Like what, why would I do that? And so letting people in your life, whether they're at your job or not, is critical to us as leaders, maintaining our faith in times like this, because we need those friends that we trust, who we've invited and given permission to speak into our lives. We need them to say, hey, dude, like, get it together, calm down. Look at what you believe. Look what you've taught for years, you know? So I think there is a piece of that as leaders is going, hey, I got to stand in front of you with my doubts too, with my fears too, but I'm still going to believe and I'm going to push us forward as a team.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to kind of jump into your journey of getting into leaderships. And we're going to go way back if you don't mind, because we're all about finding purpose in kind of what we're called to do and stepping into that. And I know it's a process. So if you would kind of take me back years as far as how you got involved with the Catalyst and the podcast, and we'll get up into your book later down the show. But
sure.
How did you jump into that? Like, what led you in that direction?
So you got to go back a little further than that. Well, I feel like I've always been somewhat of a natural leader. Like, just, you know, even when I became a believer late in high school, a lot of the volunteers and the parents were like, and especially the youth pastor was like, you got to go into ministry, because I really just wanted to coach and teach. And I was like, oh, no way. But they just, you know, they were always putting me in these leadership spots. And then, you know, went to college, you know, at the University of Georgia, and then but always in leadership positions all the way throughout. And then about a little over a decade ago, was a part of 2 of the North Point Community Church campuses with Andy Stanley, helped start 2 of those. And I was able to bring in an executive coach to really coach our teams. And that for me is where I think I always loved leadership, but I didn't know how to articulate it or think about it or see it as a skill to continue to, you know, sharpen and get better at. Until Fran, she'd been coaching for 30 years, coaching executives and all this stuff. So she started meeting with our team, and it's just like, man, I couldn't get enough of it. You know, I kept recognizing, wow, this is so critical for us as men and women, whether it's, you know, you're faith-based or not. Leadership is critical to the movement of organizations, of products, of events, you know, whatever that looks like. And I really just started becoming even more a learner of leadership. What does that look like? I remember sitting in a group coaching time. I can tell you which seat I was in and where. And Fran was coaching my team. And I remember just this idea popped in my head. And I was like, I think I could do what she's doing. And it wasn't like I could go replace her. It was just, I really think I love this enough that I could coach and I could really learn some of these assessments and do some of the things that she does. And I went to her not long after that. I was like, hey, Fran, I think you need to hire me to start doing this. She was like, no, thanks, Tyler. And then she just started thinking about it. And she was like, you have such a unique experience in production world and the creative world. Like, there's not a lot of coaches that are in that space. So she started pointing me in the right direction to get some training and different things. And I really, even as I was still working at the church, really started kind of my journey of coaching leaders. And you know, so it's just kind of been this journey. And then, you know, next thing I know, I'm producing Catalyst as a contractor, and then they want to bring me over full time to really coach the team and then do the creative stuff that I'd cut my teeth on. So it's kind of, it's an interesting journey to say the least, but I think leadership has always been a piece of the puzzle for me. It's just honing in the ability to articulate it and coach it has really what's really come into fruition over the last 5-6 years.
You know, what I liked what you said, I thought it was interesting. So at the beginning, when you started that conversation, you said you thought you were going to teach and be possibly like a coach or a teacher.
Yeah.
But it's funny how that's already set, I think, by God in our DNA. It's there.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't work out how we thought. So maybe in your mind, you're thinking I'm going to be a coach and a teacher, stuff like that. But yes, you were, but you're going to be coaching and teaching leaders and not necessarily students at a school.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. It's funny how that works.
Yeah, it really is. I love that, how the Lord does that. So along your journey, I'm all about stories and just kind of hearing about highs and lows. So I'm just curious, is there one that kind of comes to your mind where you're, and I don't know if this is after maybe Fran hires you or something like that, and you're cutting your teeth and learning stuff, but did you have one of those kind of moments where like, it couldn't be worse than this, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then God showed, you only have to do one, but make it good. But obviously where God shows up, and then you just kind of learned a lesson. Right. The Lord just showed you like, hey, this is part of the process.
Yeah, well, and just to go on the record, friend never hired me. She actually was like, no, you just need to she was just pointing me in the right direction to get my own stuff going.
That's
and
awesome.
So she's still a really close friend. But actually, I talk about this at the beginning of the book, and it's a lot of the emphasis behind the book, which was a couple moments in my life where I've had, I would say, close friends and leaders in my life basically tell me that their struggle with me was not my leadership, and they felt like I was going to struggle in leadership because of my personality, and told me that, which is bold. It's an interesting thing.
With the way you led, just your personality,
just my wiring.
Okay.
The way I'm wired and the way I think, and being incredibly extroverted and optimistic, and some of this stuff, and very low on structure, and so. There was just, and in this day and age, and actually not just this day and age, but most of the time, the culture in our world, when it thinks of leaders, it's thinking of men and women who just get it done, no matter the cost. And, they love details, and they love planning and all this. I'm the opposite of that. I really am. I don't have this major drive in me to achieve these things. I definitely don't have a lot of detail or organizational skill. It's not my wiring. But in the moment that one of these guys said this to me, I remember thinking about Psalm 139, which says that God knit me together in my mother's womb. And I just remember thinking in that moment, okay, if what he says is true, then the very thing that God did in Psalm 139 by giving me this personality, he must have made a mistake. He'd given me a personality to flounder and not to flourish. And I just don't think that's true, John. And what I think is, if you read that verse or that chapter and you keep reading, he knit us together, and a few verses down it says, while looking at the breadth of our life, while looking at that story, while knowing in high school I'd want to be a coach or a teacher, but recognizing that 20 years later I'd be coaching and teaching in a very different arena, because he gave me a unique wiring for that. With the very two areas on the right path that are the opposite of precise, organized, and achieving, which is what specifically one leader just felt like there's no way I could be a great leader because I didn't have that. The opposite of that is high. I'm low in that, but I'm really high in instinct and improvisation, which is what makes me, those very things that I was being in a sense told are going to keep me from great leadership are the very two things that made me a great producer of live events. My instinct and my improvisational skills at events, I come alive. Next week, we have our biggest event of the year. We've spent months preparing for it. The preparation wears me flat out. The event, when it's go time, I come alive. That's where I'm made. You know what I mean? That's my unique thing. And so that very conversation, I just remember going, okay, I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that God made a mistake with the way he wired me. And if anything, I'm going to spend the rest of my life calling out the uniqueness in those leaders around me so that they don't ever feel that same thing, that they see that their calling and vocation and their life has to be connected to that uniqueness that God knit us together. In the New Testament, he says we are a masterpiece. But man, most of us as men and women spend our lives chasing somebody else's uniqueness, coveting other people's skills and talents, instead of actually becoming proud. For some reason, God gave you that unique skill set, that unique thinking, that unique processing ability. So that was one of those moments. It was brutally hard to hear. And yet over the last, 15 years, it's really become the foundation of something I believe in as a leader, which is that God uniquely made us for unique purpose. And we've got to tap into that.
Yeah, Tyler, take me to that moment, though, because I love the fact that you talk about you didn't receive that word that was spoken over you. I mean, think about, I'm just thinking about like Michael Jordan, obviously, which is a lot of people know that story. But anyway, as a freshman, he gets cut from the team. It would have been easy for somebody to say, you're just not good at basketball.
Right.
And that happens a lot in different arenas. But was there a point there where you almost received that word because you kind of get down and you're like, well, maybe I'm not good and maybe I'm not, or maybe I can't be a leader or something like that. But then you really do have to change your mindset and say, no, I don't receive that. I can do this. I mean, did you struggle with that, or are you just like overly optimistic?
I wish I could say I don't. I still struggle with it. Like every week, there's a time where it's like, there's a time it's like, okay, God, is this really what, is this it? Is this the thing? But one of the things, we lead a ton of young leaders, a lot of millennials. And one of the things I'm noticing in the next generation is this fear that every day and every task, if not perfectly connected with your calling, feels like you're missing the boat. And the truth of the matter is there are days that I do a ton of stuff, like being in Excel at any point in my life is literally the opposite of what I feel called to do, right? If anybody decided to hire me as a CPA or an accountant, they're losing their mind. Like, that's just the wrong spot for me. But there are days I've got to do some of it. And I think the next generation, one of the things I've been trying to teach them is, hey, your calling doesn't necessarily entail every single detail of your life. Like, you got to do the job. There's a job to do. And I have yet to find a job that 100% of the time I'm doing exactly what I'm great at. Right.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
That's real. It doesn't exist. Right. Even you and I, before we recorded, there's things you're doing. You're like, okay, I'm just doing it because I have to right now. I'm preparing for a new season or this, that, and the other. It's life. I think there's days that I'm like, okay, Lord, really? This is what, you have me doing. But I keep going back to, and even in that moment, a friend of mine told me the other day, he said, you ever have somebody, UPS try to deliver a package that's actually not for you? If it's not for you, you literally can just say, I won't sign for it because it's not for me. And he said, that's the way he thinks about when the enemy brings lies to your mind, or when you start feeling this doubt or these fears. It's just going, this fear creeps in your mind and you just go, no, I'm not going to sign for that. That's not for me. And so there is some ways to just try to offset that fear of like, gosh, is this perfect? Is this exactly what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I in the right spot? And honestly, of course, when these two people said this to me, first thing in my mind was, are they right? Are they right? Am I just kind of going to make it, or does God have something for me that's flourishing? And what helped me too, is I thought of two specific people out of the 6 people that started North Point Community Church, which is where I was going. And they were wired very similar to me and very successful at what they did. And so it helped me to have some actual mental pictures or examples of other leaders who have a wiring similar to mine who've been successful. Do you know what I mean? And so it gave me a picture to go, I'm going to counteract those lies that I feel like are flooding my mind right now with some truths, so that I'm replacing, it's one thing to call out a lie. It's another thing to replace it with the truth and fill that spot in the right way. So for me, it's just been a constant, year after year, day after day, just waking up going, okay, Lord, even this morning, my prayer time, God, here's some things I don't think are from you. And yet they keep kind of creeping into my thinking. Would you help me remove those? It's big. It's a big part of leadership.
Man, I'm gonna hijack the FedEx delivery truck. Yeah. Dude, that's good, because there's so much truth to that, man. The enemy does try to deliver packages that aren't ours, and we take them as if they are, and we have every right to say, I don't receive that. You can have that and ship it on to the next person. So on this journey, where at kind of a point did you feel like you stepped into coaching? So Fran kind of puts you on the right track. You're still at the church doing leadership or working at the church. Did you kind of have that moment at some point where you're like, this is it. Like, I'm feeling this. This is kind of what the direction I've always felt called to, where you kind of just settled in that seat?
It's been interesting, John, because even I've always done it as a secondary thing. Like, I do it when I can, when I have time. But I see myself as a leadership coach, even when I'm leading my own team. So it's not like I have to I got to get hired to go be a coach. Does that make sense? It's a posture of leadership. Now, where really, during that time at the church, while she was helping me and coaching me, I was doing I would go in, people would hire me even to come to their church and work with their teams and sit with their individuals and do different coaching, like actual one-on-one coaching, team coaching, that kind of thing. For me, that's become a skill set that's invaluable as I lead a team. I think one of the tricky parts in our modern day world is I wish that was all I got to do, but what happens is my day-to-day of just execution of a business, of an organization, takes away from the ability to coach and lead, coach and develop. Because, and I think that's honestly, for so many years, I'm like, why don't organizations bring in coaches more often? Because it will enhance their productivity, their efficiency, their cultures. And the truth is because one, it's expensive potentially, but two, they're just not thinking about it because they're just executing. I got to show up today and I got to make sure the studs get put in right. Like I got to show up today and make sure, this event gets executed on right. Next week, we're going to show up and make sure our events get pulled off. But the truth is, I don't want them just pulled off. I want them pulled off in a way that people are filled with life, including the 20 staff that are going to be able to do that. It is not our week to just be the martyrs. It's our week to enjoy the hard work and labor for what we do. So for me, coaching is it's becoming a coaching leader, like that day in and day out. I'm trying to see opportunities to coach people. For me, it's been a combination of doing it professionally in some ways, but also just integrating it into my day to day.
It's just an overflow of who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Hopefully.
Yes. No, it sounds like it, man. I totally did. I like that you said that because you're just talking about, you're just operating from a place of who you are, who God made you. So it's just the overflow of what God's done inside of you. And because of that, it's allowed people to see that gift and that anointing, which has brought you to places that obviously you probably never thought you'd be.
Right. So, oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what would you say your biggest strengths are?
Other than a great sense of humor and good looks, I would go.
Dude, I like that, man. Be confident.
I mean, those two are, those are two really strong ones for me. No, I hope you hear the sarcasm in that. I would say, John Maxwell always said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And one of the things I write about in the book is just when life flows from you, influence grows. There's so many leaders that want all the influence, but aren't willing to put in the care time, the time to take care of the people around you. And I think one of the strengths of mine is a consistency when it comes to caring for people. It is hard, but it's not necessarily unnatural for me to see employees, my team, people around me, as the Lord's, creation, who I have a responsibility and a stewardship to, which is to care for them. And so even in the midst of really busy seasons, I don't have a hard time finding ways to care for a team or for my assistant or for a staff member or whatever. Like, it's not like I have to go work on that. Does that make sense? So yeah. I think that's a strength because it's very natural for me. I'm naturally relational. I was super encouraged. One of my close friends, when he read my book, I actually had given him an advanced reader copy, and I said, "Hey, let me know when you read it," because I already read the whole thing, which was probably the first person that didn't have to read it that read it, And I said, "What did you think?" He said, "I felt like I was sitting at the table with you, and you were just encouraging me as a leader." And I thought, well, that's good, because I think one of my strengths is I just have this passion to call out the callings, the uniquenesses, the wiring, and the people around me. And I just love doing it. And it's not hard for me. It's not unnatural for me. There are some leaders you'd be around, if they sat at the table and tried to encourage you, you'd be like, "You haven't done much of this, have you?" Because they don't have the words to say. They don't know how to do it very well. That doesn't take work for me. That's a very simple, easy thing for me. So that's a few things that come to mind. Okay.
In that, sometimes there's what would you say your weakness is, or sometimes it's an overextension of a strength. So do you feel like there's a weakness in that, or would you say it's something else?
Oh, sure. Well, I can list that. It's always easier to list a bunch of weaknesses, but, for one, I mentioned this earlier, because I'm so relational and enthusiastic, quite often my enthusiasm makes me think we can do it all. And so, I really have a team around me that helps me turn my talk into action and helps me just tries to keep me from overcommitting to things, because in my mind, I'm just so positive I can see every idea working. You know what I mean? And so that's a weakness, because there's so many times that I overextend us or myself or my family because I just see, oh yeah, we could do, oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, we can do that. And so in the same thing the thing that people love is that I'm enthusiastic, I'm a cheerleader, and I can keep us going in a positive way, even in the hard times. At the same time, that very thing is one of the things that probably puts stress and pressure on a team without me even realizing it sometimes. And again, we talked about structured versus unstructured. There are downfalls to me not being very structured. Like, there are times that, my team is like, "Hey, remember that time I emailed you, 6 months ago and you haven't responded yet?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'll get to it." It's just, but I can't live in a space where I'm constantly going, oh my gosh, it's just me. I'm not good at it. No, they need that from me. They need me to be a little better at that. So there's a requirement on me as a leader to make sure that they never think I'm going to be great at it, but I need to be decent at it. And so there's just things like that I've struggled with. And then truthfully, running a business, like thinking about P&Ls and ROI and cash flows and all these, man, it just takes the life out of me. Like it's something that is just really, really tiring for me and hard. And I don't know that it's a weakness. It's just an area I don't love, and I think that's why there's so many senior pastors at churches that have great executive pastors. And you realize that and it goes back to what we've been talking about. When you're wired a certain way, I remember my first assistant, I wouldn't give her the things that I didn't like to do because I thought, who would want to do this? Until I realized that she loved doing the things that I didn't like doing. That's what made her a great support team,
Yeah, for sure.
Those things actually gave her life, which they took life from me. So for me, it was recognizing, oh, okay, that's how this works. We get people in the right seat on the bus where they're doing the things they love to do for the most part. Now we get a team functioning that can really be a high capacity team.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that when you can really step back and recognize what just creates flow and gets you excited, and you can do that and then hand off other parts or find people on your team that are good to, like, honestly, like my wife and I complement each other really well. I think I'm more like your personality. I'm pretty driven, lots of ideas. I think we can do everything. And then my wife is able to like sit me down and be like, honey, okay, so you have like 10 irons in the fire right now, and we can only have 3. You figure out which 7 you want to get rid of, because this is just not possible. And I'm like, why not?
Right. Of course we can.
Of course we can. We'll just juggle them. And she's like, no, this is all not going to work. So I love it.
And our wives tend to be really good barometers for us, don't they?
Yes, man. Absolutely. So thankful for that. Tyler, I want to jump into your book as we start to wrap up the show, just kind of like the purpose behind it, because you've mentioned it several times. I know it's about leadership, but why don't you just kind of give us the basis behind the book, why you wrote it, and why I need it?
Yeah. So we, as I mentioned, I think there's so many leaders that don't well, first of all, let's back up to the fact that so many people don't see themselves as a leader. And so, John Maxwell, again, I mentioned him. He's the guy that helped start our organization years and years ago. A lot of us that are Gen Xers grew up going, John Maxwell's kind of the godfather of leadership for so many of us. And he's written 100 books plus. I mean, but he's always said this very simple phrase, which is leadership is influence. That's it. And so what we like to say is how you steward your influence is your leadership journey. So whether you have influence with 2 people or 20 people or 2,000 people, that is your leadership responsibility, how you steward those people. I have a really close friend who is in Nashville, and her and her husband pastor a church. And she told a story one time in a sermon of when they started their church in their basement, they had 5 people in the basement seeking the Lord together. And she recalls the night where she was just in tears looking at those 5 people and said to the Lord, if for only these 5 people, I will give them everything I have for my entire life. And I remember thinking, what a beautiful understanding of influence, that if these are the 5 that you want me to influence and pastor and that you put into my care, I'm going to take so good care of those 5. It doesn't matter if you add to that. But one of the main statements I say is, again, I mentioned this earlier, when life flows, influence grows. When you take care of those 5 people, you will be shocked at how quickly there's 10. And then all of a sudden there's 100. Because what you've done is you've recognized that your leadership journey is stewarding the influence of those few people in your circle. But what most leaders don't want to do is the hard work of stewarding and managing and loving on those 5. They want the 500 because they think that gives them some sort of credibility or title or this and that, the other. Man, you get to the 500, you're going to get crushed if you hadn't learned how to take care of the 5. And so it comes out of a place where we say as a team, like on Monday next week, when we gather as a team before the event, I will say to our team that we have a responsibility. Everybody that comes into this place, we are responsible to make sure we serve and we love well. And for us, it's all about taking care of the people that are right in front of us. we'll say this: when we want life and grace to flow from our stage and not be required for our stage. And so what that means, and there's a lot of churches, that you show up on a Sunday morning, and because the production wasn't done well, they didn't spend enough time thinking through the transitions. They, the preacher, this was a guest preacher, they didn't really vet well enough to know, man, he's saying some stuff that we don't agree with, or she's, saying that. There's a job we have to do to make sure that in every aspect, especially if new people show up this week, I want to make sure that life and grace is flowing from our stage, from our place of influence, to those who are attending, not the other way around. And I realize that's a leadership truth, right? John, I bet you've worked for or been around people who life was not flowing from them, but it was being required for them because they were leading at a poor level. They were not taking care of what their responsibility was as a leader. And so that's the idea. Which way is life flowing from you as a leader? And I've just noticed over the years of paying attention to this, that the most life-giving leaders, the ones who life flows from them the most, they have embraced their God-given, unique Psalm 139 created self, and because they're okay with who they are. So that's really the main concept of it. And then the second half of the book talks about how, when you're life-giving, what that does for your organization, for your team, for different parts of, it's way more of the practical parts of it.
Yeah. I love, kind of a catchphrase that I've said to myself for years is I can't give what I don't have. And,
right.
And what I meant from that is a lot of times, like you talked about, is who we are, who God created us to be, but also spending time with the Lord in the morning and going to my day.
Completely.
So if I start off frustrated and overwhelmed and all that, I notice that my team and my wife and my kid, everybody feels that. But when I'm able
100%.
When I'm able to step in who I am, have some peace, spend time with God in the morning, do that, the overflow of what He's put in me all of a sudden comes out onto my wife and my kids, my team, and those around me, and it just flows so much better.
Yep. That's exactly right. And when you're acting counter or opposite of your wiring, there's a tension, there's a blocking of the flow of, of life, because there's a tension in there, you're acting, it's like sandpaper rubbing against each other, and people you feel it internally, but we feel it externally, watching you try to act counter to your uniqueness. It's a little bit painful. I always quote, even in the book, I talk about this lady who was a hospice nurse, Bronnie Ware, in Australia. And for 7 years, she asked people on their deathbed what's their biggest regret in life. And there wasn't even a close second. Number one, by far, was I was never my unique self. In a sense, I was never my truest self. I spent my life trying to be what my circumstance, my culture, my family, my significant, like what everybody else wanted me to be, is where I spent my time. And that was just, but I don't want that regret in my life, John. I don't want to get to the end of my leadership journey and allow my leadership environment to dictate who I am. Like, again, like I said, my tombstone should never have the title Catalyst anywhere near it. I don't want it near there. I want to be Tyler everywhere I go. I do different things in different environments, but I want to know that if my friends show up at our event next week, they're not going to see a different person. They're going to see the guy they know that's had dinner with them or hung out, because to me, that's integrity, is that who I am in these different places is the same. And a lot of that comes back to me being okay with myself.
Yeah, man. It's just being authentic of who we really are and who we're created to be.
Yep.
So,
yep.
I dig it, man. You and I can get along great that way. I like that. Totally.
The next time I'm in Amarillo, we'll hang out.
Well, I think what I have to do is for fun, I might have to bring my Are You Real crew, and we might need to come hang out at one of your events and come promote it for fun.
100%. That'd be a lot of fun.
I would enjoy that. Okay. So as we wrap up the show, Tyler, I want to ask you, if you could go back to the younger you, what age would you pick, and what advice would you give yourself, knowing all the things you're going to go through?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I have a couple that come to mind. I usually answer this in one way, but I'm going to go a little different direction because this is just what popped in my mind. But I grew up, in a kind of low middle class. My dad was a consistent, hardworking man, but we just didn't have a lot of money. And so very early on, 8, 10, 12 years old, like financial insecurity just became emotional for me. It was very connected to that. And so for the last few years, I've really been digging into that, going, gosh, that part of my story really still gets a hold of me occasionally. And I think that's one of those things where if I could put faith into there at those ages and go, hey, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not real. Doesn't mean that God's not moving. And it's specifically for me, it's in the areas of finances, because I grew up in just a really kind of uncertain space with that. And it's dictated. And I've got, what dawned on me back in January this year is I've got 2 boys. I don't want them thinking that. I want them to believe differently. I want a different worldview for that. So for me, it's probably going back to that young age and recognizing just because it's not in my hands right now, just because the circumstances are playing out differently than what I was being told or believing, doesn't mean it's not real, that God's not there, that he's not going to do those things. And I'm telling you, Don, to this day, it's still something I struggle with or wrestle with. And I just want to get at peace with that. I want it to be something that I am fully alive in, that I can live abundant life when it comes to that worldview, that God is always doing stuff on our behalf, even in the area of finances when you don't see it. And that's a big journey. Life, I think that's going to be a lifelong journey for me. I don't think there's ever going to be a point I turn the corner and go, okay, cool, I'm good with that. But I got to recognize that. And that's a part of my leadership journey.
It's funny you brought that up. I'm in the process we talked about before the show is I'm writing a book right now. And what it's about is speaking prophetically, like God's words over our life, like going to the Father. Because it made me think about that, because I've struggled with that as well, is what you're talking about. And I think a lot of men do, especially when you grow up kind of poor at times, but literally speaking financially over your finances. And we'll go into it another time of the show, but literally the start of my book 5 years ago was God taking me into my basement in a quiet time and saying, I want you to speak over your finances the way I see them. And it literally changed the game for me, like drastically. Awesome. And it's crazy. And it literally started this 5-year journey. So and I'm saying that to tell you this, I don't believe it's going to be a lifelong journey for you, because when you catch God's view of your finances for you, all of a sudden, kind of going back to the beginning of the show, of that faith and that being optimistic, it literally, you're like releasing heaven on earth over circumstances, and it's powerful.
I believe that. So, I also believe that right now God's upgrading me in that,
Yeah, absolutely. That's exciting.
He's taking me through an upgrade in that space. And that's what we were talking about at the very beginning of this, is me starting to speak truth over any of those areas, and scripture over those things, and prophetic words over those things. I'll tell you, prior to this season, we don't have time to go into it, and maybe that's another story 10 years from now. But prior to this last 3 to 4 months, it's been really hard. I had 6 different words sent to me, and I haven't had somebody send me a word in a couple of years specifically like that. And so in a 2-week period prior to this craziness that went through it, and those words, those prophetic speakings in my life from people that know me, people that haven't talked to me in a long time, a couple people that don't know me from anybody. And yet those few things have literally been oxygen in times where it's like, God, you gave me the heads up, so I trust that you're moving, even though I don't see it. It's pretty, so I agree with you, man. I fully agree with that philosophy and that thought. And there's just something powerful about God's word, and when he speaks to people on our behalf.
Yeah, man, you got me excited, dude. I got goosebumps right now just thinking about it. So, okay. Yeah. So that being said, last piece of parting advice you want to leave our audience.
90% of leadership, a friend of mine said this the other day, 90% of leadership is self-awareness. And because usually my answer is I go back to 20 something and say, become even more aware of who you are. And I would just say, for those who are listening, who are going, number one, am I a leader? Yes, you're a leader, because you have influence with somebody. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you have influence with those kids and other moms and other, families and whatever. How you steward your influence matters. And the best way to do that, the starting point for that, is really to understand your Psalm 139 uniqueness, God's given wiring for you, and quit pursuing other people's wiring. Be yourself and let the Lord just grow us in his favor and his faith as we do that.
Yeah, dude. That's some of the best parting advice I've heard in a long time. I like that one. So totally resonates with me. All right, man. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and just doing what you're doing. I love the fact that you're just leading people into to who they are. How do we find you as far as your podcast, your book that's out, all those things? How do we connect with you and get your resources?
Yeah, it's easy. If you just go to tylerreagin.com, REAGIN.com, you can find The Life-Giving Leader, which is the book. It just came out last week. And so that's out. CatalystLeader.com is the home base for all the Catalyst things. Our podcast is there, all that, all the content, you can get connected to our app. And we have Catalyst Insider, which is a weekly email that just gives you a little kind of 3-minute to 5-minute clip of one of our speakers doing something, speaking about a leadership thing. And then obviously our events are there. So we'd love to have you join us if we're in your neck of the woods, or if you just want to load up on the plane and come see us. So CatalystLeader.com, and then again, TylerReagin.com, or at Tyler Reagin on all the social medias.
All right, man. We'll get all that information, and we'll definitely be connecting with you. So Tyler, if you hold on just a second, we're going to wrap up the show. Roar Nation, I hope you guys got that. There is a leader in every single one of you, and man, it just needs to be released. And if it hasn't, release it. And if you're in the process and you are a leader, man, just hone it in and get your skills. I love the fact that Tyler brought in Psalms 139. You are uniquely, wonderfully, and creatively made. And also when he talks about being self-aware, because as you hone in on those gifts and those talents and things that God has given you, it's just going to allow you to excel at who God created you to be. And what I love about that is then it draws people to you because they see something different that's inside of you that maybe they don't have. And that's uniqueness. And because God called all of us to be unique. So anyways, that being said, please jump on social media, get on our Facebook page, like us, send us messages. We've had a lot of engagement lately on there, so it's been fun. And just love to hear your thoughts. So love y'all. Remember, be real, be authentic, and be you. God bless.
That's all for this episode of Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You. Be sure to go to areyoureal.org for your free questionnaire to identify your gifts and talents and how you can use them to help people become leaders and catapult them into their destiny to help others become the leaders of tomorrow. We appreciate you spending your time with us and look forward to helping you reach out and revolutionize next time on Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You.